In 1620, while the Mayflower was in Provincetown, 18 of its men sailed in a small shallop, searching for a place to live. They came to present-day Eastham, where they were met by a group of Nauset. After a brief but violent encounter, the English left towards today's Plymouth. In 2020, we remember this first encounter. We explore its meanings for today and tomorrow.
The following text is an excerpt of Chapter 1 of Ian Saxine's book, The Story of the First Encounter at Nauset. Chapter 1 is titled Wampanoag Paths to 1620. For the people of the dawn, the meeting at Nauset the newcomers would call the first encounter was in fact only the latest in a series of encounters with strangers who arrived from the sea. Those encounters had been happening for quite some time. Rather than representing a dramatic break with a tranquil past, they instead represented the latest in a series of transformations occurring on Turtle Island, or what the newcomers later dubbed North America. Their descendants today are known as the Wampanoag, an appellation that probably originated from the neighboring Lenni Lenape, meaning Easterner. Rather than a single people, the Wampanoag in 1620 were a network of villages living under the Pokanoet Sachem, which was centered at Sowams, now Warren, Rhode Island. Like their neighbors, the Wampanoag spoke a dialect of the Massachusetts language, itself part of the broader Algonquian language family, which predominated the coastal regions of North America. As in Europe, neighboring languages bore similarities, and many people learned multiple tongues for use in trade and diplomacy. Although most historical accounts emphasize the very real differences between the Wampanoag and the English, in much of their material life as well as their beliefs about the world, they had much in common. Like all human societies before the last 200 years, Wampanoag and English people lived under what scholars called the biological old regime, before the Industrial Revolution transformed how people traveled, produced goods, and related to the natural world. Travel depended on muscle power, wind, and water. People ate food that was grown or killed very near where they lived, and most people lived in modest dwellings with few furnishings, clothed in a few handmade items. Wampanoag and English alike oriented their lives around the weather and the seasons, living a bad harvest or two away from hard times. Both also knew that otherworldly forces could bring prosperity or disaster, depending on the respect paid to them. Everyone knew comets and eclipses portended major events. For English and Wampanoag people, a person's status within the wider community depended on family connections, age, and gender. Although the details differed, in both communities, a person's sex determined the daily tasks they would expect to perform. Of course, great differences did exist between Wampanoag and English society, but those should not blind us to the broad similarities in lived experience. Some of the most fundamental differences between Wampanoag and English stemmed from accidents of geography. Among the most important drivers of human culture in the past 10,000 years or so has been the distribution of plants and animals suitable for human domestication, and which humans thought worthwhile to spend the time and energy tending to for food, giving up a more mobile lifestyle of hunting, gathering, and fishing. None of the major staple food crops on Earth originated north of Mexico, and no large mammals capable of domestication, except the llama, originated in the Western Hemisphere. Plants indigenous to the Cape Cod region, like sunflowers and cranberries, are not the crops upon which cities are built. In contrast, early inhabitants of the Eurasian landmass were able to domesticate and trade grains like wheat, oats, barley, and rice easily along an east-west axis from China to France. Maize, corn, the major staple indigenous to the Americas, originated in Mesoamerica and took thousands of years to be successfully bred to adapt to various climate conditions between Mexico and Massachusetts Bay. Beginning around the year the English called 1300, Nauset women successfully bred strains of maize that could thrive on the Cape. Maize formed a complementary agricultural package with squash and beans that Wampanoag and their neighbors took advantage of in their fields. Women planted the so-called Three Sisters in hills together, with beans climbing the cornstalks and low-growing squash vines preventing weed growth. Even before the arrival of maize horticulture in the region, Wampanoag and their neighbors had begun gathering in ever larger sedentary communities around estuaries, where abundant maritime food sources complemented wild plants and game. By 1620, Nauset families on the Cape had formed individual farmsteads surrounded by maize fields and storage pits for food still situated at convenient estuaries. Like all native people in the area, they still relied on a combination of farming, fishing, hunting, and gathering to provide necessary food and trade goods. Compared to regions with a long history of large-scale agriculture, like Mexico, modern-day Peru, India, China, and Europe, indigenous North American societies like the Wampanoag lived far less densely upon the land. Villages like Patuxet, with perhaps 2,000 residents in 1615, dotted the landscape. But nowhere did Algonquian speakers gather in numbers approaching the Aztec capital, 150,000 at its peak. Human population figures before modern censuses are always difficult to pin down, and Native American demography is no exception, further complicating the task of any scholar brave or foolish enough to try to extrapolate from archaeological remains and the fragmentary records of European observers. The colonizers tried to pay attention only to numbers of fighting men. Scholars, including this one, have as a result engaged in passionate debates about topics such as the ratio of warriors to overall population, the average number of residents per house, and other matters that most ordinary people find tedious. The implications, however, are profound, because if the high counters are correct, then the death toll of European imported microbes and accompanying colonization is much higher. In 1615, the Confederated network of villages led by Usamakquin, Massasoit, and the Pokanokets numbered anywhere between 12,000 and perhaps to 25,000 people between the border of present-day Rhode Island and Cape Cod, with the Massachusetts villages around the bay of that name boasting similar numbers. A European who visited the Nauset on the Cape in 1605 described cabins and gardens all along the coast of present-day Massachusetts. Each home was surrounded by sufficient open land for farming, which included corn standing 5.5 feet tall amidst beans and squash. Like other native people in the region, the Nauset used fire to clear underbrush before planting their fields. Unlike many of their neighbors who moved to new fields after 20 years or so, the Nauset allowed some of their fields to remain fallow, enabling them to remain near the fisheries that continued to be an important part of their diet. Throughout the region, women were responsible for work surrounding the villages, including tending to crops and gathering plants for making baskets, mats, and medicine. Women also moved their families' domed residence, weetus or wigwams, as seasonal needs demanded. Men performed tasks that took place outside the village, such as hunting, trapping, deep-sea fishing, diplomacy, and war. As with native groups throughout eastern North America, this division of labor involved different types of spiritual power as well, with women responsible for the creation of life in the form of bearing children and nurturing crops, and men responsible for taking the life of animals in hunting or humans in war when preservation of the community required it.
My name is Joanna Holleck. I hope that you're enjoying the Sunset series so far. In addition to the Sunset series, Eastham 400 is also producing a second program called the Campfire series, which will take place on Sundays in July and August. The Campfire series is a series of 1-hour-long videos that will focus more in depth on some of the themes that we discuss here at the Sunset series. The first Campfire series video, which will be released on July 5th, is a recording of a presentation given by Ian Saxine last fall, in which he discusses his book, The Story of the First Encounter at Nauset. The second Campfire Series video, which will be released on July 13th, is a presentation given by Mark Adams, as he talks about the changing environment and landscape here on Cape Cod. The Campfire Series videos can be found in the same places that the Sunset Series videos can be found, on our Eastham 400 YouTube channel or at eastham400.org. We hope that you will join us for this series. Thank you.